So hi everyone, Michael Wayne, and I'm with Anadea Judith for another one of our Visioneering the Future series of webinars in Noel from Montreal. Wonderful. So tonight's topic is universal basic income and the future of work. So welcome everyone. Anadea, anything?
Yeah, hello everybody. We're really excited to talk about this. We think it's a real world changer idea, and lots to talk about it and look at it from different sides. And we just like, you know, in our desire to visioneer the future is to entertain different ideas and trot them out and see what they would look like and what would happen if we did it. And that's how we begin to get there, is we have to bring these ideas into much discussion before they're implemented. So this discussion is between us, and we're both going to do some presentation, slide presentation, and then we open it up to discussion at the end. So if you have questions, please hold them till the end. You can write them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, and we will have a time for Q&A and for you to put in your ideas, your questions, your offerings, whatever, to co-create the future that we want.
Yeah. And also the Q&A box is another place, another option for
that's right. Yeah.
Question. So universal basic income is a big topic. It's a major idea that's been around a long time. In my presentation, I'll briefly sketch out the history of it, but it's something that is so radical, revolutionary, but not radical at all, or not revolutionary at all, but it can change. It's a game changer. And I think it's, where it may have been a twinkle in someone's eye for a long time, it's an idea whose time truly has come. So, so without further ado, should we begin, Anadea?
Sure. I think I'll start this time, and I have a little slideshow that just sort of frames the discussion, and then Michael will come in with a little bit more detail about what I'm talking about, and we'll flush it out, and we'll see where it goes. So I'm going to do a screen sharing with y'all, and let us begin. So I like to start with the idea, what does an enlightened civilization look like? I mean, that's what we're trying to create here. Not that we're going to get there, but if we don't dream of it, how are we ever going to move in that direction? So we have to stay, you know, what are some of the qualities of an enlightened civilization? Well, one of them is that we would have care for our environment. We would keep a healthy world. The environment is our, you know, ground of being. It's the source of life for us, the source of our food supply. We get everything we need. If the environment goes, so do we. And the environment is just terribly threatened right now. So that's one foundational aspect of an enlightened society. Another one is that people are kind. They help each other out. There is a sense of trust that someone can help you out, that you can trust your neighbor, you can trust even a stranger on the street. That would be an enlightened civilization where we're kind to each other, where we care about each other. An enlightened civilization is where people are healthy, where they have access to healthy foods, where they can exercise and breathe clean air, where they have access to good health, universal health care, and that is a right to have that health care when they need it. But it's also good medicine, medicine that honors the whole individual. So a healthy society with healthy bodies. An enlightened civilization is people who are educated and informed. They're capable of critical thinking, of questioning, of discussing and talking to each other and engaging in ideas that educate. And they don't just follow blindly what they're told. An enlightened civilization is one where people's basic needs are met. And here's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I think Michael is going to visit again later, but our physiological needs for clean air and water and food and shelter and sleep and sexual partner or enjoyment, safety and security. You can walk out on the street at night and know you're going to be okay. Where there is a sense of love and belongingness. You belong to something greater than yourself, where what you do gives you self-esteem, and where you have the opportunity for self-actualization, where you can make a creative contribution and have some kind of meaning in your life. And this seems pretty basic stuff, as Maslow put it out. And that in that sense of meaning, that the work we do, it's not that we don't work, but that our work has some meaning, that it matters to us what we're doing. We feel like we're making a contribution. And where everyone is employed in some kind of work that, gives meaning to their lives, that we help make things happen in the world. So those are just a few of the things of an enlightened civilization. But what does an unenlightened civilization look like? Well, we have pollution. We have pollution in the world, and we have quite a bit of that, and it's getting worse. I've heard that 7 million people a year die from air pollution, which is, about 7 times what the coronavirus is likely to be this year. And yet we don't talk about it in the same way. Where there's a lot of poverty and homelessness, and we have a lot of that. Our streets are looking more and more like this these days. 50 million in poverty in the US, 734 million worldwide, and I actually think the number is much, much higher than that. 567,000 homeless in the US. That's pushing towards 1 million people homeless. And now if we have a lift on the eviction moratorium where, landlords can evict people who haven't been able to work during COVID, then they are kicked out of their apartments. We're going to have millions more homeless. What are we going to do? Where are they going to be? This is not an acceptable situation. And in that poverty, and that leads to crime and violence, and people steal because they don't have enough. It's not just because they want to be criminals. And of course, we have a lot of white collar crime as well. I don't just mean to make this street crime, but it's an unenlightened society has a less safe place to be. And an unenlightened society is unable to combat illness when it arises. We don't have a concerted global effort, especially in this country, to get proper testing and tracing and treatment out to people. And certain classes of citizens like Blacks are inherently more subject, because they work in the public sector, to be infected with the virus, and even unprecedented death, which is completely unfair. An unenlightened society has problems like this that just won't go away. And an unenlightened society has ignorance instead of, questioning beliefs and critical thinking. And I just picked this picture that caught my eye one day. Here's this guy really angry holding this sign, "Drink the freedom bleach." It's just like screaming for ignorance. You drink the bleach, brother, and you're going to die. It's not the freedom bleach at all. But we have some terrible misinformation out there, and ignorance that believes it. And so many people in an unenlightened society work at meaningless jobs just because there's a work ethic that they're supposed to work, or they need the money to pay their bills. They don't enjoy what they're doing. And 40 million are now becoming unemployed by COVID. That's a huge number of people. And we are lifting up a lot of these jobs that we say, well, maybe we didn't need those jobs after all. Now, with the advent of the tech industry, it is predicted that 2 billion more jobs that exist today will be gone by 2030, being replaced by mechanization, robots, artificial intelligence, the things that are just that tech is taking over our jobs. So, is work going to be the main way that people earn income and pay their rent and their bills? We have to bring this into question. And COVID, with 40 million people unemployed, is certainly bringing up this question of maybe we should pay people not to go to work so we don't spread the virus. So how do we get from here to there? How do we get from the unenlightened aspects of our society to the more enlightened aspects of society? Well, I mentioned many different fronts, and they're too much for one discussion, but in the examination of universal basic income, let's look at what people basically want and work with our natural tendencies. People want to contribute. They feel good when they're contributing to something larger to themselves, whether it's their neighborhood or their friends or their workplace. when they make a contribution and their contribution is valued. People want to be part of something larger than themselves, that sense of belonging that was in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to give to something better than their little meager lives, that people actually want freedom more than they want to buy a bunch of things. That when people are asked, what would they do if they had more income, if they suddenly hit the lottery, or, what are they working so hard for? Say, I want more time off. I want more freedom to explore this or that, or read or study, more than I want a new car or a bigger house or more clothes or more things, that the freedom is actually more important. They want more time with family and friends. That's part of the freedom, but quality time. So you're not always working so hard you can't spend time with your children. People naturally want to do self-improvement, go to the gym, work out, take yoga, take courses online, improve their mind, improve their intelligence, improve their skill set, but that takes time. People naturally want to educate themselves, similar to self-improvement. People want to be healthy. People want to live in beauty. And people want to live in peace with each other and have meaning in their lives. So if we take some of this and we look at the benefits of UBI, let's look at how it can address some of this. So we said an unenlightened civilization is polluted. Well, if you took a lot of the cars off the road that were going to work each day, many people travel an hour to 2 hours in a commute each day, that contributes enormously to climate change, to greenhouse gases, to the frustration of sitting in a little metal box for 10, 20 hours a week. This is a ridiculous thing we're doing where we send everybody to work at the same time in their own little individual metal box. So we'd reduce a lot of pollution, not only in the commute, but all the needless goods that are produced because somebody had an idea that it would make them money, not because we need those things, but then we advertise for people to buy them, and then we have factories to produce them and trucks to ship them. If we eliminated a lot of that and that money wasn't our objective, a lot of that would go away too. So it would be very good for the environment. And the alleviation of poverty, the really critical, just bone-chilling aspects of poverty. Some of them are malnutrition, excuse me, crime, as I mentioned, comes out of poverty, drug abuse, depression, hopelessness, mental illness, things like that come out of not being in a poverty situation with hope that you might never get out. UBI can discourage low-wage jobs because it gives you a little more choice. Maybe you're not that desperate anymore and you don't have to work for a pittance doing back-bending labor. It lowers financial stress, which comes into even, households that seem to have enough. Financial stress is just something that goes with modern society these days. And a little bit of extra income can take that stress out. And it also can free women from situations of domestic abuse where they feel like they can't leave because they don't have enough money to live on their own or support their children. A little extra money gives women a little more empowerment. In fact, when this was first suggested by Richard Nixon many years ago, and they did some pilot studies, they found that more women did leave their relationship because they could, and that was one of the things that scared the men, and they shut it back down. So UBI also allows people to spend more time in education, and the pilot studies that have been done in various places, and I'll get to that later, have shown that one of the things people do is they go back to school, or they stay in school longer, or they get trained for better job skills. So they do educate themselves, which means a smarter, more enlightened society. And universal basic income can foster creativity and innovation. In some of the tech industries out here in California where I live, they started giving people free Fridays. And the idea was that you would come into work, but there was nothing you were expected to do. You could hang out have coffee with your coworkers all day long if you wanted to, and you could do whatever you wanted. And what people did is they had longer coffee conversations, and they came up with innovation and ideas, and they fixed bugs in a software that was bothering them for some time that they'd never gotten around to. And that a lot of good things came out of it, and they decided to keep that so that they could foster that creativity that was coming out of people's free time. They still got paid, but again, they were allowed to work on whatever was their pleasure to work on. So, of course, when you bring up UBI, people always bring up the objections, as they do with any new idea. And let's talk about some of those. And I think Michael's going to talk about some later too. So the biggest one that people firstly bring up is it's cost too much. Where will we ever get the money to give everybody, say, $1,000 a month? That's what Andrew Yang had proposed, who was running for president at one time. $1,000 per month for the adult working population would be about 2.8 trillion per year, which seems like a huge amount of money. Carl Whitercrest did a different study on it and found that if you account for the fact that people pay taxes on that, and a lot of that money comes back in, it also saves money spent on mental health and all sorts of things that we keep, and natural disasters from climate change and all that. But really, even just paying taxes in, it comes down to about 539 billion, or 3% of GDP. Just to compare, the 2.8 trillion for UBI, 2.4 trillion in the US has been spent so far on the coronavirus, and about 11 trillion worldwide. The military spends 721.5 billion in 2020. That was the 2020 budget, at least as I looked it up. And natural disasters, a figure I had for 2017 was 307 billion. So there you're up to $1 trillion already in money that is spent. Not that everything that we spend in the military would go away, but certainly we don't need quite as much for there, and we could use a little more of it back home. Another argument is people are lazy. If they get universal income, they'll have no inclination to work. They'll sit back, put up their feet, watch TV all day, and eat bonbons. Well, the initial studies have shown that that's not so. That, and people actually they do keep working. They do make contributions. They do go back and take care of their education. But we also have to look at stock market investors who are already getting something for nothing just because they put, $1 million in the stock market and it went up, 5%. They just made, $50,000 in a day. They didn't really do anything for that other than whatever they did for their initial investment. That's the way it works. And that's getting an awful lot for nothing. Some people say universal income, basic income should be a right. And people say, well, if they have that right, they won't work. The right needs to be coupled with responsibilities. And I think this is true in general in our society. We have this adolescent culture that has fought for our freedoms and fought for our rights, and human rights are very important, but we need to couple them with responsibilities, that there could be a responsibility to make a contribution. So some people say, oh, it's too big to happen. Well, that may be, but it is already happening in various places. There have been studies in France, in Canada, in India, in the Netherlands, in Finland. Alaska has had a dividend that they get from the oil industry. And what they're finding, like in Finland, was that people were happier, less stressed, and more trusting toward each other and toward institutions. Canada had a decline, 8.5% decline in hospitalizations and doctor visits. So people didn't get sick as much. They had higher graduation rates in their education. In India, they found they had improved sanitation, better school attendance, and better nutrition. So, there are things that happen, and we start in small ways. We do little pilot studies. We find out what happened. That's the way change happens in this world. And, it may be too big to happen, but the fact that people have been getting checks for not working due to COVID, it's already happening some degree in a small scale. And a woman in the UN, Kani Wignaraja, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but was proposing a global UBI for the UN to begin looking at. What would that look like? So that's even bigger than having it in one nation. And mayors in 15 cities in the US have been advocating for UBI, 15 major cities. So that's a pretty good thing. And then against the objections, you could also provide alternatives. Maybe it's not a universal basic income, but it's the same idea, that it could be based on need. You know, the people who are making $1 million a year don't need an extra $1,000 a month. This is basically sort of our welfare system, that you prove a need and you get some help. But maybe that can, you know, be a little higher, and it doesn't go to everybody, but it goes to people that need it most. Maybe instead of having to show your need, you show your contribution. This is what happens when people get grants, for example. They say, you know, if I could make this study or I could do this invention, then it would serve humanity in this way. This would be a contribution. Because of that, they get a grant. So we get an income for showing what we would really like to contribute. There's a lot of things people would like to do, except they're so busy making a living, they can't do it. We could also, another alternative is to make more things free, like utilities, transportation. What if buses and trains were free? What if healthcare was free? This is something that we've talked about with universal healthcare. And you know, that may seem preposterous, but you know, public schools are free right now. They come out of your property taxes, but if you're a renter and you don't own any property, you can still send your kid to public school and you don't have to pay anything for it. So we do have some things that the society has termed as important enough that they are free. And we can do microloans and micro grants, even the paid protection plan, PPP, whatever, payment protection plan that's been instituted because of the virus. That's, you know, giving people small loans so they can keep their businesses going. So there's other ways that, you know, still amount to giving people money to help them out, even small amounts. So let's just take a reverse consideration, a kind of thought experiment, if you will, that if we already had universal income, if we were used to getting it, where everyone's getting $1,000 a month from the government as, you know, part of their daily life, and people propose taking it away, what would we say? Well, we'd say, well, then we'd have to create a whole lot of unnecessary jobs in order to give everybody work. And people would have to compete for those jobs. And they'd be in competition and stress. It would create more pollution for everybody to go to those jobs. They'd have less time with their family. The arts will go away. People couldn't have time to be as creative, and we wouldn't have as much music and art around to make life wonderful. People would be too busy to make any social contributions. And what would we do with the money anyway? Make a war? Which is where a lot of it's going. So this is just some way of kind of breaching the subject of universal income, which could be an idea whose time has come. And it could be something that is heralded in by the unemployment due to the virus, that we've had to do something to help people out who have been told not to work because the industry they work in, restaurants or bars, or, you know, brings people together in a way that they could be contagious. And we have to do something about that. It may be bringing this subject up so it can be discussed. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Michael.
Oh, well, thank you, Adea. Yeah, you know, and it was such a great way to start your presentation. What would an enlightened society look like? And it just seems like such a natural thing. I mean, that an enlightened society, it just would be a normal society, a humane society, and instead we've created this unnatural, unenlightened society, but we can turn it around. Okay, so I will begin my presentation. There'll be some overlap with Anadea, and then also some information that will add on to it. And let me just get it going. Here we go. Okay, so universal basic income and the future of work. Okay, so a brief history of universal basic income, UBI. And this image on the left is a book by the writer Annie Lowry, Give People Money. And she did a couple years old, 1 or 2 years old, and she writes how a universal basic income would end poverty, revolutionize work, and remake the world. And that's one book among many that are written in the last few years. So universal basic income was first conceived 500 years ago in the book Utopia by Sir Thomas More. And truly, like Anna Day started off talking about an enlightened society, it'd really be somewhat of a utopia. In the late 18th century in America, Thomas Paine, the American revolutionary, advocated for it. 1935, the first level of a universal basic income became law in the United States with Franklin Roosevelt signing into law the Social Security Act, giving a guaranteed income to retirees. Then at a day I mentioned Richard Nixon advocating universal basic income. The United States Congress actually came close to passing a law, but at a day I mentioned, it showed that women might leave their husbands. And so Republicans got nervous, like, oh, family values, women leaving their husband, oh my God. And the Democrats were against the proposal because it didn't really allocate enough money. So then it just kind of fell apart. And this year, Andrew Yang repopularized the idea of making it a core campaign message, advocating for a UBI. And so UBI programs around the world, this image comes from the website of an organization, an NGO called Give Directly. They've been around 10 years or more, and in that time, they've primarily working in Africa, giving money directly to citizens of African countries, and the amount of money is not needed, not at the level would be needed in the US and other developed countries. They've donated 168 million over the 10 years, and now they're even doing a COVID-19 UBI program. A lot of the money comes from crowdfunding, and then donors match it. And so here's a few programs, and Dave mentioned a few too. And as I said, Give Directly has given 168 million over the last 10 years, primarily to various African countries, citizens in various African countries. The UN recently stated that a UBI should be given to the world's poorest people. Spain has announced they will begin a UBI program soon. Canada, for our Canadians on this call, I don't know if you're getting this pandemic relief, but Canada's been giving their citizens, some citizens, $2,000 a month as a pandemic UBI. Finland recently released a favorable report on the results of a 2-year pilot program that was given to Finnish citizens. Numerous American cities are banding together, collaborating, giving a UBI. And I mentioned 15 US cities. And it was Stockton, California has been doing a UBI pilot program for a few years. So it's the mayor of Stockton who has banded together with other mayors. Some large cities like Los Angeles and Atlanta are part of these numerous cities. Some American politicians are clamoring for Canadian-style pandemic UBI. And in all the pilot programs that have been done over the last number of years, they've all found favorable results. And here on this left, where it says, Day had the objection, oh, kind of a myth, oh, people will be lazy. Here, oh, people will blow it on booze. And no, they don't blow it on booze. The pilot programs have found it's people use cash in impactful and creative ways. So, as I said, the UN report that in developing countries that UBI would combat poverty. Instead of giving people jobs or food or water or medicines, you give them money, let them decide what to do. It really builds autonomy and much more self-reliance and empowers people when you give them the money. And even in the United States, Martin Luther King, in his Poor People's Campaign in the last couple of years of his life, started advocating for universal basic income, and he felt the solution to poverty was to abolish it directly by the guaranteed income. Martin Luther King is not the only person who's advocated for it, but in Alaska, it's been done actually for over 30 years. They call it the Alaskan dividend, or the permanent fund dividend. Alaska's rich in oil revenues. And so instead of the government keeping it or putting it into other ways, they shared the annual dividend with Alaskan citizens. The money comes from oil revenue. The money has usually been about $1,000 to $2,000 a year. At the end of the year, the Alaskan legislature decides how much money based on the revenues. So it's not at the level what Andrew Yang has advocated for American citizens, but still it's nice that people get a dividend. And a conservative case has been made for dividends too, based on carbon taxes. So it's kind of a progressive conservative case. In their mind, they created something that fits into their paradigm, strengthens the economy, reduces regulation, helps Americans, and shrinks government. And a number of conservative pundits have signed on to it. So they feel like have a carbon tax to help the environment, and the money that's accumulated would then be shared with Americans, like Alaska's dividend. Andrew Yang, as we all know, ran for president on his core campaign of universal basic income. One of the things he said is that he said the conditions that universal basic income would meet are the conditions that created someone like a Donald Trump, by scapegoating immigrants for issues in our economy that they have nothing to do with. As jobs leave based on automation, going overseas, mainly automation, it's not anyone's fault. They're just not there, and the jobs aren't coming back. And that's what universal basic income would fill that gap. And so a couple of entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs have gotten behind universal basic income. One is Richard Branson, the well-known entrepreneur, and he says artificial intelligence coming, there needs to be a basic income, and artificial intelligence will result in people in just less hours in the day that people are going to need to work, which is not a bad thing, as I will go into in a little bit. And Robert Reich, the well-known former Secretary of Labor during the Bill Clinton presidency, also says the same thing. The universal basic income is coming as artificial intelligence and robots eat away good jobs. And then the well-known writer Ta-Nehisi Coates also has talked about that work will likely disappear in the next 50 years, and we need to start talking about a universal basic income. So lots of people from different perspectives are talking about it. And a study by the Roosevelt Institute found that sending every adult $1,000 a month, which seems to be the magic number, $1,000 a month, would permanently grow the economy by 12.5% to 13%, as well as add 1 million plus people to the workforce. And this isn't rocket science. It's because when you put more money into people's pockets, they spend more money. And that's the thing that economists have pointed out during the pandemic in the United States, probably the same in Canada, but in the United States with the pandemic unemployment insurance, people were getting an extra $600 a week, people out of the jobs. That money was propping up the economy. So yeah, this money circulates. It's not trickle down, it's just all around. So, but here's the thing. A lot of people say, oh, people, if they get universal basic income, will not work. Well, in 2014, Gene Sperling, who was an economic advisor to then President Obama, said that that the economy had 3 people looking for every job. So it's not so much that people don't want to work, they can't necessarily find a job. And that was 6 years ago. And then Paul Krugman, writing last week in the New York Times, the economist Paul Krugman talked about, it was an article about the unemployed staring to the abyss, Republicans look away, an article about the pandemic unemployment ending at the end of July. And as he said, he pointed out there were 30 million people who were receiving benefit from the pandemic unemployment of 600 a week, but only 5 million job openings. So, Republicans said, oh, we give people this money, they're not going to work, but a lot of people didn't have a job to go to. And it's led to a term that's been popularized for the last 10 or more years, precariat, a play on the word proletariat or precariat, and it's a new global class fueling the rise of populism. Precariat is people whose work is precarious, and it's a condition of existence without predictability, security, affecting material or psychological warfare. And it's, these days, it used to be people worked for a corporation, they could work from their early 20s till they retired, and they'd have a pension fund. People just don't have it. There's the gig economy, and just work that they expect to work, spend more time working and not be paid enough. They could be let go at a moment's notice. There'll be contractors. And a lot of people, going back to what Andrew Yang said, fueling the rise of populism. It's not immigrants taking it. It's just, this is the way the economy and corporate mindset works now. And so this was an article a couple of months ago in the New York Times by Nicholas Kristof, that McDonald's workers in Denmark pity us. Nicholas Kristof was talking about comparing Denmark to the United States, and he talked to a McDonald's worker in Denmark, and he pointed out the starting pay for a burger flipper at McDonald's in Denmark is about $22 an hour, plus 6 weeks paid vacation, life insurance, a year's paid maternity leave, pension plan, and of course, universal health care. And in the article, he contrasted it with McDonald's worker in the United States. I can't say what it is in Canada, but he said in the United States, it's about $10 an hour. And that's just outrageous that people, and they don't get 6 week paid vacation. They usually don't even get much in the way of paid sick leave, if any, and they have to get their own insurance, medical insurance, if they can. A lot of companies try to keep workers working less than 30 hours a week so they can't get health insurance. So it's it's a bad situation in the United States. And there was one company, a US-based company that went against the grain. You may have remembered this company. It was called a Seattle-based company, payment processing company called Gravity Payments. 5 years ago, the owner of the company had a brainstorm, and he wanted to pay everybody the same minimum wage. That minimum wage was $70,000 a year. And Rush Limbaugh, that brilliant, I say that with my tongue in cheek, brilliant pundit, called Dan Price, the CEO of the company, a communist for doing such a thing. But so the Inc. magazine went back and talked about how the company's doing. And they found the company's thriving, doing very well. Workers still getting paid $70,000. And I bring this up because this is not universal basic income, but it's in the same regard. Many companies aren't going to follow suit, but if you pay people well, you give them a living wage, more than a living wage in this case, and they thrive. And it said that Dan Price said before the 70,000 minimum wage, he calls it minimum wage, there were probably about 2 babies being born a year among all the workers. I think there was 120 employees. And he said, now we've had, in the 4.5 years, 40 babies born. And besides the baby boom, more than 10% of the company have been able to buy their own home in Seattle, which is a very expensive city. And he said before, Hegarty is the author of an article from the BBC. He said before, the figure was less than 1%. And people who are working there feel more secure. They're having kids, owning a home, you know, the American dream, perhaps, and they just feel more secure. They're more dedicated to their job, and they're not slacking off. They're not lazy, but working harder. And one of the employees said, when money's not at the forefront of your mind, you're doing your job, allows you to be more passionate about what motivates you. And senior staff said they're less stressed. And they're flourishing outside the office. The CEO of the company said people become healthier, cut their commutes, spend more time with their family, help loved ones pay off debt. And he said, we saw the effects of giving somebody freedom. And that's it. Guaranteed income, you know, 70,000, you know, very generous, enlightened employer, but even just universal basic income gives people a sense of freedom. And as Anna Dea pointed out, there's the Maslow argument of universal basic income. And this is what I think is really the game changer, that Abraham Maslow's the pioneer transpersonal psychologist pointed out, and the hierarchy of needs, when we have to have our basic needs met: physiological, safety, security, a roof over our head, food, money, pay the bills. And once that comes, we can actually start becoming part of a community, having better relationships, feel better about ourselves, and work towards self-actualization, all based on the hierarchy of needs. So, and then the mind itself, before basic income, you're figuring out, making sure you have money to live, especially in this precariat economy. And then little things take up less bandwidth. You know, your bandwidth is taken up by money to live, work, and then enjoyment after hours, meeting people, self-improving, self-actualizing, helping, short-term goals. But after basic income, when you feel more secure, money to live is not in there as much as the self-improve, self-actualization, innovating, enjoyment, helping, long-term goals, meeting people. Boy, that sounds like a great way to live. That's that enlightened society that Anna Dea talked about. And it's been pointed out that universal basic income will explode human creativity. You know, this is a chart that someone put together saying this is human creativity today with UBI, and it just will shoot through the roof. People will have the freedom, just like in that little image of the mind before and after UBI, to just explore what they want. And I think that's the greatest thing. Universal basic income, Anna Dea mentioned it too. Accelerate innovation, because again, you'll have that safety net, so you'll have less fear of failure. Whatever that innovation might be, whether it's the arts, creativity that way, work, creating something, you know, it's not always successful or makes it, but you'll take your chances a little more. And so this begs the question, what is the nature of work? And what is our true nature? Are we really supposed to spend most of our time working at a job? That's really what is this all about? Many have said no to that question. Interestingly, the many who have said it have been I don't have anybody here from today. We're going back in time. The famous economist John Maynard Keynes predicted in 1930 that by 2030, only 10 years from now, people would be awash in leisure time and only work 15 hours a week. Ben Franklin, the American founding father, thought, like John Maynard Keynes, 4 hours a day of work would suffice. The author George Bernard Shaw in 1900 said that by 2000, workers will only be working 2 hours a day. Sorry, George, we haven't gotten there yet, but we're hoping. And in the mid-1960s, the United States Senate Committee projected by 2000, the work would be 14 hours. So this was on the mind of a lot of people, but instead we've gone the opposite way. And what have we become instead? Just workaholics. The brilliant writer, futurist Jeremy Rifkin has said, basic income is not a utopia. It is, but it's not. It's called living. And it's a practical business plan for the next step of the human journey. And I think as you're listening to this, I think you get you get why this would be the next step in the human journey. And then another novelist, software engineer, one by the name of Nicole Anderson said, talking about work again, what's the point of being human if the only work that is revered is the work that has nothing to do with caring and only with consuming? If we lived in a society that was based on caring for one another, taking care of the environment, taking care of our health, and that was the emphasis, that would be, again, an enlightened society. And then there's a moral case for UBI, which kind of sums this up. It's about more than just providing a minimum financial standard. It gives the people the freedom to establish their own identity, who they are, their reason for being. And without the fear of destitution, with that safety net, you could have all the chance to pursue the life you want. And isn't that the greatest moral virtue? So, and Buckminster Fuller, that great visionary, inventor, genius, he understood this too. He said, we keep inventing jobs because of this false idea that everybody has to be employed in some kind of drudgery because he must justify his right to exist. So yeah, it's like, who invented this world that we have to be in this drudgery all the time? And the anthropologist David Graeber wrote a book that came out about 2 years ago, a bestseller, a huge bestseller called Bullshit Jobs. And he looked at the history of work, why people work, and what's wrong with our society. And he said that he talked about John Maynard Keynes' prediction of 15-hour work week, but as he pointed out, David Graeber said, instead we've created bullshit jobs, a form of paid employment so pointless, unnecessary, pernicious, even the employee can't justify their existence, even though as part of the conditions of employment, the employee feels obligated to pretend this is not the case. Graeber felt that 50% of people work at bullshit jobs, and he said the pains of dull work are suitable justification for the ability to fulfill consumer desires, and fulfilling these desires is a reward for suffering through pointless work. And yeah, I just said prosperity extracted from technological advances has been reinvested into industry and consumer growth for its own sake, rather than the purchase of additional leisure time from work. So he talked about, and Dave mentioned too, that Puritan work ethic that makes us feel that we get our worth from work. And so makes the labor of capitalism to religious duty, that workers don't reap advance in productivity as a reduced workday because a societal norm. They believe that work determines their self-worth, even if they find work pointless. And Graeber called it a profound psychological violence and a scar across our collective soul. And he said, he made a very good point. He said, instead of correcting the system or people realizing, hey, what is up with this? Instead, human psychology tends to attack those whose jobs are innately fulfilling. People will look and say, what's wrong with that person? They don't work much. Or as Republicans say, well, they're being paid to not work. We can't keep giving them pandemic insurance, unemployment insurance. And in the last of the book, in David Graeber's conclusion of Bullshit Jobs, he said, UBI is the solution because it would let people work at their leisure. Buckminster Fuller, again, another great quote, said, everybody is born a genius, but the process of living degeniuses them. Yeah, when you're working at bullshit jobs and your bandwidth is taken about making money to live, you don't have the time to be creative. And that's where that earlier slide where human creativity will take off, and that innate genius that we all have will flourish. So, and as Anadea pointed out, it will cost a lot less than you think. Um, she pointed out, do back of the envelope, you would say, oh, there's $2.8 trillion is what it costs a year. And then she pointed out the economist said 539 billion is really what it costs. And it will be cost even a lot less than that. And it might be, there might be a net surplus because one, you're going to have less mental health, physical health issues, less people in jail, and you're going to have innovation in flourishing. And who knows what will come of it. A society will flourish beyond belief. Now, this is something I'd like you all to be aware of, that for the last 12 years, there's actually been a universal basic income. It's called quantitative easing, and it's been universal basic income for banks. Banks have gotten, over the last 12 years in the United States, money that the Federal Reserve conjures up on their computer. Some call that printing. Here's a printing press, but it's not. They just press a few keystrokes on the computer and conjure up money. It's been about at least 40 trillion. It's probably more. Worldwide, it's been a few hundred trillion because the quantitative easing has been done by many major central banks around the world. So instead, we need to have a quantitative easing for the people, give money directly to people. And so, yeah, here's people jobless, but it keeps the Fed printing money because the Fed, and this is the Federal Reserve in the United States, most countries have their own central bank that conjures up money out of thin air and gives it to banks. But as long as the economy's hurting or the Federal Reserve says it's hurting, they will make money, conjure up money, and give it out. And so here's Wall Street saying, thank you to this guy jobless, because they are making lots of money. So this was an article in Foreign Affairs. It just said, let's print less money, but transfer more. Let's have central banks give money directly to the people. That would be the money that could be given to your bank account every month, $1,000 directly to you in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, Japan, China, any country with a central bank, or every country around the world. And so, just like Anadea said, an idea's time has come. Famous quote from Victor Hugo, one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, that's an idea whose time has come. And so I hope we've made our case for a universal basic income. I'm sure none of you would disagree. As I said at the very beginning, it's radical, revolutionary. I think it's a game changer. I pointed out the 40 trillion in the United States that's gone to banks, the level of the mega rich who've been beneficiaries of that and hiding the money in offshore accounts all over the world. We're not going to, that's another story and conversation. But besides them, and none of that money trickles down, let's give money to the people, all of us, the rest of us. So that's my conclusion. And I hope we've given you food to think, food for thought, and like to open it up now for any of you who'd like to give us your thoughts. You can put in the chat box. You can use Q&A. You can raise your hand where we would call on you if you have any thoughts. I mean, what would you do if you had universal basic income, if you had that money coming in every month? It would change your life. Maybe it's enough where you don't have to work, or maybe you still need to work, but you could be more choosy. And really, it would be just profound. When we did this call, Anadea, would you like? They're hogging up the.
I was just going to say that one thing I would do is more seminars like what we're doing, because we're doing these for free, and having a little bit of, breathing room in my income, I have time to make these slideshows or to research something new. When I was running around after money all the time, I didn't have that kind of time. So just being a little older in years and allowing me to, work part-time has enabled me to do some of the things that I feel are making a contribution.
Okay, so we do have some people missed this. We got a bunch of people putting into the chat box. Let's see. Um, Sherry, who let us know she was calling in from Canada, she said it ended the end of August, so ends this month. So well, hopefully in Canada, the government there will see to it that unless things are doing better in Canada, the United States is a wreck. And then Creative Arts wrote that a lot of the money in the U.S. has found its way into the stock market. Oh, you put that in at 7:30, Creative Arts. So I addressed that. Went into the stock market. Even more has gone into the pockets of the filthy rich. And as I said, that's a whole nother conversation about where that money goes. But banks move that money laundering, basically. Oh, and a day you said there were actually people who took the COVID bailout and used it to lobby. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they use that money to lobby against other people getting it. Imagine. There was an article in the New York Times about that. Sherry says, I would study towards my doctor's degree to be a physiotherapist and counselor so I can help people here in Canada. I heard there's a waiting list of 4 years of low-paid income earners if they like to speak with a counselor. Wow.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we need more. Yeah, that's beautiful, Sherry. And that's the thing. We could, you'd be free to pursue your dream, your vocation, avocation. Maybe it's, helping people, um, filling a need in society, or whatever that is. And Creative Arts wrote, given that all sovereign states are broke, I expect there will be a debt jubilee before there is a UBI, then blockchain-based digital currency established. Yeah, there may be alternate digital currency and alternate currencies that some communities around the world are doing. They call it alternative currencies or complementary currencies. There may be a debt jubilee. Sovereign states broke. It's actually a very complicated issue, this whole thing about debt. And I don't know if Creative Arts, if you were on the call when we did about economy, and I talked about the economist Stephanie Kelton, who promotes an idea, modern monetary theory, that's gaining a lot of popularity, because she, in her new book called The Deficit Myth, addressed that and just said it's a myth, deficit, because what a government may have debt is money in the hands of people. One entity's debt is another entity or people's surplus. And that's why I said UBI will become a surplus. And I mentioned the Roosevelt Institute in their study that will increase GDP, increase more jobs, because that money will circulate. But it's changing the priorities, political will, ethical will, spiritual will, psychological will, to change this, that this money doesn't go into the hands of the filthy rich. And Adea, anything you want to
Well, I think
add?
that underneath this, we have to have a basic change in values, that it doesn't get exploited. Like this comment that some of the money found its way back into the stock market. And there were people that exploited the bailout checks, including Trump's own industries, who got, stimulus checks, and obviously didn't need them. So there needs to be a change in basic values about the thirst and quest for more money is not the driving force. But I think this tendency to hoard money comes out of scarcity and a scarcity consciousness. And I was, as I was thinking about UBI, and thinking about people in my age group that are looking at their retirement, you know, and including myself, thinking, oh, I need to sock money away for the years that I can't work, and I need to have it sit there in a bank account or the stock market or wherever I can afford to put it. That money is not really very much in circulation. It's not doing anybody any good because it's just sitting there against my fear of when I'm 90 years old and I'm not working, you know, how am I going to survive? If I had a universal basic income, and, you know, certainly Social Security is starting to, you know, I haven't started that yet, but is sort of on that order that older people get a little dividend, then I wouldn't need to, and people in my age group wouldn't need to sock it away somewhere, and that money could be in circulation. So it really is a huge, huge game changer. But we need to change the values, the underlying values, which I think come from a scarcity.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really at its core, changing the values and going from a scarcity-based mindset to an abundance-based mindset. And I think that's what enlightened society does. You know, that scarcity mindset that comes from the reptilian brain just wants to hoard. And
Yeah.
it's that mega rich mentality, especially the banking world, that finance world that's hoarding that money, playing casino games with their money, creating things, crashing economies, and all of us suffer because of it. But you know, I think people are rising up and saying it's not acceptable anymore. And I think you know, we've had a detour in the last few years because of the American government and the Neanderthal ways, but we're going to go back again to um, that open society and an open culture that we were starting to move towards, and that was working towards abundance in that way.
I see Shari mentions, which I totally agree, that it's a root chakra issue. And that
Mm.
when, you know, we have such a denigration of the earth and our bodies in a terrible way, that people have been born in hospitals and ripped away from their mother and put in a nursery and all that, that gives a cultural first chakra wound. And that cultural first chakra wound is you know, is creating three crises: environmental crises, a health crisis, and an economic crisis. So those are all first chakra issues. And so, you know, that's a deep change in values.
Yeah, and I think you know, sometimes change moves slowly, and sometimes it takes quantum leaps. And I think we're in an in an epoch that quantum leaps are needed because, you know, not to be a doomsayer, but you know, there's a number of crises, and climate change is a big one. And there have been a number of government studies and UN studies and scientific panels that have said we're in a very crucial period right now. And I think the majority of the world's citizens understand this and want to do something. And so they're going to push. I think this change is going to come from the bottom up, just like universal basic income, dealing with the environment, and all the issues that are arising. This massive wealth inequality that we're seeing. So all of us are on board and ready to create this change. Not only to be the change, but to do the change.
I see Joanne wrote, and she's agreeing with you about the grassroots. International involvement is a must. Mindset change is grassroots. Value of life and service in what each and everyone has been called to do is the movement to fertilize, educate, entrust, and of course, love. Well, I always say we're moving from the love of power to the power of love as an organizing principle. And
Yeah,
this is part of it. This is part of, you know, giving a hand up to the poor and the people who were born disadvantaged and have, you know, no way of ever climbing out of it, that they get just a little help, and that benefits all of us.
mm-hmm. And the hope is, and I love when you, every time you say that, we're at a day that we're moving from the love of power to the power of love. And Joanne also, thank you for pointing that out too. The hope of the future is that not so much that it's that stories change, our cultures change when the narrative changes, and it doesn't take every person. It just takes that small number, which has been pointed out to be 5% or 10% or the 100th monkey, whatever concept you want to use. But it's more people start adopting behavior patterns, it then becomes the prevailing values. So there's a lot of people. It's a worldwide movement. Millions and millions of people are doing this. Yeah, and Amy's on board, and just like all of us, we're all, we all understand this. And this, as Anna pointed out, is the enlightened society. In Star Trek, it was science fiction, but much of science fiction is really like glimpses into the future of what our society can become. So it's really just changing the story.
Yeah, where to take it from here is that, this is a radical idea for many people. It's as radical as peace or, some of the other things that we know are possible, but, oh, we'll never get there. And with anything that is, brought into reality in the collective, it has to be talked about and talked about and talked about and talked about. I remember the whole issue of gay marriage. I live in California, where it came up and then it came up and it came up and it was voted on. And then finally they voted that gays could marry, and then they took it away from them. And they said, oh, well, all the people that got married, that wasn't valid. And then finally they got it so they could marry again. And then all of a sudden it was nationwide in the US, that, oh, okay. And what I see is that every time it got voted down, there were more discussions on the radio. There were more, people have to talk about things for a long time to get their head around it. So take these ideas and talk with people, research more on your own. Talk to anyone you know. You have to get it out in the collective consciousness, and it has to grow there before it can become instituted.
Yeah, and the history of new ideas is that new ideas often get dismissed or chased after, being told they're bad ideas, but the people who have those ideas and stick to their principles usually are the ones who are the visionaries. Just like I mentioned Dan Price and his Seattle-based company giving everyone $70,000 a week, and Rush Limbaugh $70,000 a year. Rush Limbaugh calling him a communist. Well, Rush Limbaugh's total, as Al Franken called him, an idiot, big fat idiot. But yeah, Dan Price has shown the world what can be done. Oh, so.
Well, that seems to be about it. No more, no Q&A and no more on the chat. And we are a little bit over the hour, so I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. As always, we've been doing these since March. We've been doing the Visioneering the Future. We'll be back again. We've been talking about the future of leadership might be the next one. We'll be on holiday as all of Europe is for the rest of August. We won't be doing another one until September. Hopefully you're on either Anadea's email list or my email list, or you see it on social media. So you'll find out when the next program is, and whenever it is that we can finally get together live, we'll probably do a live program.
Yeah. And if you have topics you would like us to really approach on Visioneering the Future, we take one topic each time. Type it into the chat box. We'll take your considerations.
Yeah, or email us one way or another.
Yeah.
And this has been recorded, so we'll send out the recording within a few days.
Okay, thanks for signing on.
Yeah.
See you next time. You'll hear from us. We don't know exactly when it's going to be, but you'll hear from us.
Yeah, great. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again. Bye.